Labour have fewer seats in this election, the Liberal Democrats have fewer seats in this election. They are perceived to have lost, they've come second and third, yet they have over 50% of the vote and could form a government.
The Constitution, as we know, dictates that the incumbent Prime Minister has the opportunity to form a government first.
Nick Clegg will be thinking about what he's going to say to both of the leaders. They have to dance with him.
Yeah, would it have legitimacy in the eyes of the public, the idea of Labour who've kind of lost a whole load of seats, the Liberal Democrats who've lost seats and seen, you know, that they are then deciding the shape of the next government?
Well, that's the rules. The rules are that it's the numbers to win in the House of Commons, and that's what you have to get. Those are the rules, and those are the rules that have to be followed.
I think a coalition with the Conservatives would be almost impossible. That's my personal view. It's not a party line. I think it'd be very difficult on policy grounds.
Let's bring Ed Vasey back in from the Conservatives, and you heard what David Steele was saying there. Unlikely that the Liberal Democrats would work, in his view, with the Conservatives because they differ so hugely on policy.
Well, what I heard David say was that it would be unlikely that we'd have a coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And again, speaking personally, I'm not part of Tory High Command. I think that's probably ripe.
What's in this programme? What's in your programme? Can we form an agreement which actually gives the British people a government which is in the shape of what they actually want? And because of our similarity of views on economic policy and because of our similarity of views on voting reform, probably the best way to do that, and we want stability, we don't want to have to plunge into another general election, probably the best way to do that is some sort of agreement with the Liberal Democrats. That's obvious, whether it's an arrangement or a coalition or a partnership, whatever you call it, that's what probably it's our obligation to seek.
Lance Price, good to talk to you. What should happen now in your view?
In my view, although I agree with Harriet Harman that there's a vast overlap in interest between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, I think it's in their long-term interest to allow David Cameron to form a government, a minority government probably, and that Labour and the Liberal Democrats should go into opposition, into a constructive opposition, whereby they would allow David Cameron to put a budget through, but both Nick Clegg and whoever leads the Labour Party would then do what they promised the electorate they would do and protect frontline services, use their voting power in the House of Commons to prevent cuts to frontline services.
Well, when you say include the Lib Dems, I don't think there's any serious prospect for a coalition. A coalition has to have a joint programme. And I don't think it's unreasonable to point out that the Liberal Democratic manifesto was, if anything, to the left of the Labour Party on this occasion, on disarmament, on taxation, immigration.
Clegg and David Cameron are going to have to work out their chemistry. It's difficult to see how, with the strength of commitment in the Liberal Party to radical change in the electoral system and equally strong commitment by the Liberal Party, particularly Vince Cable, to securing deficit reduction without destroying the prospects of recovery, how a deal can be struck with David Cameron that is durable as well as honourable and very transparent for the public. Those conditions have got to be satisfied.
And I agree with Malcolm. I think that it's almost impossible to imagine that there could be a coalition between the Conservative Party and the Liberals. Policies are too far apart.
I think it's unlikely that you could have a full-blown coalition. I think there's too many differences between the parties.
Neal, Lawson, are we in the last days of Gordon Brown here? Is the leadership contest about to begin?
Well, I think there's a great prize here for progressives in Britain. It's not about leadership, it's about capturing that progressive alliance, that progressive majority. Because if you look at the hard figures, 53% voted for centre-left parties and only 37% voted for the Tories. Now, is this the moment where we can crystallise on a principle basis? Because if people want strong and stable government, you can't just do it around opportunism. You have to do it on principle. Is the kind of marriage between social liberals and liberal socialists one that can endure around a set of values and a programme?
Sure.
And the key thing in there is PR. Gordon has to do a deal with the Liberal Democrats or he takes the party into the wilderness.
The Tories are never going to come up with the Lib Dems' first demand, which is genuine reform over PR.
Labour to do it?
I think that Gordon Brown could do it. I think there are many people in the Labour Party that could do it.
Should Mr Brown give Nick Clegg?
Well, I'm sure he will give him electoral reform. My manifesto did have in a referendum on electoral reform, OK, AV. I mean, it wouldn't be a great
alternative vote.
It wouldn't be a great step to put PR into that.
You think he might go further?
I mean, I know I live in Scotland. You're from Scotland. In Scotland, we get on fine in the Scottish Parliament with a single member constituency and a form of PR. And the Labour
do you
agreed to
think that he should go and offer PR Mr. Brown, proper PR.
Yeah, of course he should. It's an absolute no-brainer. If he doesn't, then we're in the wilderness for a generation. It's the chance to change British politics, and we could have a progressive century and not a conservative century. The prize is enormous, and there's one key decision.
Advising Gordon Brown, what would you advise him to do this afternoon?
I think you wait and see what the Tories propose, and if it's true the Tories can't propose proportional representation, he has one strong card in his hand, which he can play very effectively in the negotiations with Nick Clegg. Now proportional representation is on offer from the Labour Party, although not from a position of strength. And if the Liberal Democrats want it, that's their best hope of getting it.
Being Campbell, very senior Liberal Democrat, you'd need more on electoral reform, would you?
There's no doubt that electoral reform is right at the very heart of the Liberal Democrat view. Proportional representation is an important plank in the Liberal Democrats' view of how the country's politics should be reordered to try and recreate a connection between public and politicians. It lies right at the very heart of that, and as the results in the election that's just finished show, and indeed as the attitude of the public throughout the campaign shows, there's increasing support for the importance of proportional representation.
So a reminder of what the statements that everybody's talking about were, just in brief, a précis of them. David Cameron's, first of all, what he called a comprehensive offer to the Liberal Democrats, set up a committee on electoral reform, repeal Labour's national insurance rise, and no compromise on Europe or defence issues. He made that fairly clear. And the Brown statement, economic recovery is the priority. Legislation was needed to reform the voting system, and people should decide the outcome of that in a referendum.
Some previous David Cameron quotes on PR, which is quite interesting. You know, asked by Ben Brogan from The Telegraph whether he'd accept a referendum on PR, Cameron says, "We're not proposing a referendum on PR because we don't support PR. It would be rather strange to have a referendum on things you don't support. We don't want PR and we don't want a referendum on PR."
People around the country, it's obvious that many of you have strong reactions to the things that Liberal Democrats have done in government. And if we've lost your trust...
So you see, voters might be thinking to themselves, you know, I've placed my vote, and yet all these discussions are going to take place behind closed doors. I won't have a say in it, and all of a sudden they're going to be presented with a government and with a Prime Minister that they might not be happy with.
But the fact